The night our neighbor hid behind our car, covered in blood and shaking in the dark, was the moment we realized we had made a terrible mistake moving next door. 3 years earlier, life had been simple. My partner and I had just bought our first home. It wasn't huge, but it was comfortable. The neighborhood was quiet. The street was lined with trees, and the neighbors were friendly. We quickly became close with the couple living right next door. They were kind people, always ready to chat over the fence or wave when we came home from work. So when they told us they were planning to sell their house about a year and a half later, we were interested immediately. Their home was bigger than ours. It had a driveway, a garage, and even a large bathtub. Things our small starter home didn't have. After thinking about it for a few weeks, we decided to buy it. Our old house, the one right next door, went up for sale. Several people were interested, and a few even wrote letters explaining why they wanted the house. In the end, we chose a young couple from Poland. They seemed polite and respectful. Their English was good enough for conversation, though they didn't speak Dutch like we did. When they first moved in, they asked us simple questions about the house and the neighborhood. Everything seemed normal. Looking back now, that was the quiet before everything turned strange. Not long after they moved in, odd things began happening late at night. Sometimes, right around midnight, loud banging would shake the shared wall between our homes. Other nights, music would suddenly blast at a painful volume. It never lasted long, but it happened just enough to make us uneasy. We started to realize we didn't actually know the people living only a few feet away from us. Then one afternoon we noticed something strange. The neighbor's car pulled into the street, badly damaged on both sides. Long scratches ran along the doors like the vehicle had been dragged against metal at high speed. When we asked what happened, he laughed nervously and said he had scraped one side against a concrete pole and the other side against a trailer turning a corner. The explanation didn't make much sense, but we didn't question it further. A week later, things got much worse. Around 6 in the evening, the neighbor called us in a panic. His voice was shaking. He said there were 2 men outside his house turning his security cameras away from the door. He begged us to look and call the police. We checked through the window. He was right. 2 men were forcing their way into his house. We called the police immediately, but by the time officers arrived 20 minutes later, the men were gone. During the chaos, the neighbor's wife rushed home and ran inside, calling for their little French bulldog. Luckily, the dog was safe. Later that night, we checked our doorbell camera footage. It showed something unsettling. Before breaking in, the 2 men stood calmly outside, discussing which house to target in Polish. Nothing inside the house had been stolen. No suspects were found. The whole situation felt staged somehow, but the police never contacted us again. Then about a week later, the real nightmare began. I was at a friend's housewarming party when my partner texted me, "The music next door is insanely loud again." A few minutes later, he called me. His voice sounded terrified. Our neighbor's car had just crashed straight through our front garden and slammed into their own front door. 2 men jumped out of the car and started loading expensive electronics into the back seat. Large TVs, professional speakers, and other equipment. My partner recognized them immediately. They looked like the same men from the earlier break-in. This time the police arrived in only 7 minutes. They caught the men while they were still filling the car. When officers asked for identification, the driver calmly claimed he was our neighbor, using our neighbor's real name. But something was wrong. For 9 months, our neighbor had never spoken a single word of Dutch. This man spoke it perfectly, though with a strong Polish accent. The officers immediately knew something wasn't right. Suddenly, the driver slammed the car into gear and sped away. What followed was a wild chase through our normally peaceful streets. Eventually, police vehicles surrounded the car and arrested the 2 men. But the story didn't end there. When officers returned to the house, they heard movement inside. They went back in and dragged out a 3rd suspect hiding in the living room. While we were inside our own home speaking with an officer about the damage to our yard, the doorbell rang. When we opened the door, we barely recognized the person standing there. It was our neighbor. His face was swollen and covered in blood. One eye was completely shut, his lip was torn open, and one arm hung awkwardly as if it had been badly injured. Without a statement from the victim, the officer couldn't do much. Later that night, the neighbor rang our bell again. This time he looked even more desperate. His hands were shaking as he told us a story. He said he had cheated on his wife. According to him, she had sent people to hurt him after finding out. He begged us to let him sleep inside our house for the night. We were too frightened to get involved in whatever dangerous situation he was part of. Instead, my partner offered to drive him to the hospital. We dropped him off around 10:30 p.m. and told him we would stay somewhere else for the night. But the truth was, we went back home. We locked every door and turned off the lights. Around 1 a.m., our dog suddenly began growling, not barking, growling, the deep warning sound he only made when someone was right outside the door. We checked the doorbell camera. The neighbor was standing on our porch. He rang the bell over and over while we sat silently in the dark watching the screen. Then headlights appeared at the end of the street. The neighbor panicked. He jumped off the porch and crouched behind our cars in the driveway, hiding in the shadows. Watching a wounded man hide behind our vehicle in the middle of the night was one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen. The car stopped in front of his house. A woman stepped out. It was his wife. She walked toward the front door, then suddenly paused and looked toward our driveway. She had seen him. For a moment, everything went silent. Then she walked toward him under the pale glow of the streetlight and began crying loudly, an eerie broken sound that echoed down the empty street. She kept asking questions through her sobs. He didn't answer once. Eventually, they both got into the car and drove away. We didn't see either of them for 3 days. When the wife finally returned, she was alone. She found the dog still inside the house. Before going back in, she quietly told us something that still stays with me. I don't think I will ever see my husband again, and honestly, after everything that happened, I realized something. I'm not sure I want to know what really happened next. I realized someone had been watching me through my bedroom window for years. The night my dad finally saw him standing there. This all began when I was 14 years old. My family had just moved into a new house in the suburbs of Montreal, Canada. It was a split-level home, which meant the floors were arranged at different heights connected by short staircases. My bedroom was in a strange spot. It wasn't on the main floor, and it wasn't fully in the basement either. It sat right between the two levels, almost at ground level. One wall of my room was connected to the garage, while the other side had a large window that looked out into the backyard. The window had vertical plastic blinds, but several of the panels were missing. Even when they were fully closed, there were small gaps where you could see outside. On the garage side of my room was a closet with large sliding mirror doors. That meant when I lay in bed, I could see the reflection of my window in the mirror, no matter which way I turned. At the time, I didn't think much about that, but later, it became the most terrifying part of the room. About a year after we moved in, I started having trouble sleeping. I was 15 by then, and had developed a habit of staying up late watching YouTube videos on my tablet. One hot summer night, I left my window open so cool air could come inside. Around midnight, I heard something outside. It sounded like light footsteps, or someone slowly shuffling across the grass. I immediately paused my video and listened. The sound stopped. I assumed it had just been part of the video I was watching, or maybe the wind moving something around in the yard, so I pressed play again. A few seconds later, the noise returned. I looked toward the window but couldn't see anything through the blinds. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing and went to sleep. For the next few nights, everything was normal. Then the sounds came back. This time when I paused my video, I listened more carefully. The shuffling was there again, and I could swear I heard something else too. Breathing, slow, quiet breathing. My stomach tightened. I glanced toward the window, but once again I saw nothing. Trying to calm myself down, I turned away from the window and faced the closet mirror instead. As I reached for my tablet, something moved in the reflection. Through one of the small gaps in the blinds, I saw a shape, a human silhouette. My entire body went cold. I jumped out of bed and ran upstairs to my parents' room. My dad looked tired and skeptical when I explained what I saw, but he still grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check the backyard. A few minutes later, he came back inside. He said there was no one there. He also checked the security camera that pointed toward the side of the house. It didn't show anyone walking toward the backyard. I suggested someone might have jumped over the fence into the neighbor's yard, but my dad shook his head. "We live in a safe neighborhood," he told me. "You're probably just scaring yourself with those horror videos." I tried to believe him, so I went back to bed, but the strange sounds didn't stop. Every few weeks, sometimes months apart, I would hear them again. Soft footsteps, shuffling in the grass. Sometimes that same slow breathing. Each time I forced myself to ignore it. I told myself it had to be my imagination. When winter came and snow covered the backyard, the noises stopped completely. Eventually I forgot about them. But when spring returned the following year, the sounds came back too. They never happened often, maybe once or twice a month, always late at night, always after 11 p.m. I started avoiding looking at the window entirely. Even the mirror made me nervous. One night, curiosity got the better of me. Instead of looking directly at the window, I slowly glanced at the mirror, and there it was again, a shadowy human figure standing outside. I ran upstairs and woke my parents again. Just like before, my dad searched the yard and found nothing. And once again, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it. This strange pattern continued for years. When the weather got cold, the noises stopped. When spring returned, they started again. Eventually, I started going to bed earlier just to avoid being awake during those late hours. But everything changed one night in December 2021. A powerful windstorm was hitting the neighborhood. I was in my room watching a live stream with my boyfriend on Discord when I decided to grab a glass of water around 11:30 p.m. As I walked through the living room, I noticed something unusual. Both of my parents were still awake. They were sitting quietly on the couch looking tense. They almost never stayed up that late. I asked if something was wrong. They quickly told me everything was fine and sent me back toward my room. As I turned toward the stairs, flashing red and blue lights lit up the front window. A police car was pulling into our driveway. My parents stood up immediately and rushed me back to my room, telling me they would explain later. 2 minutes later, they called me upstairs. This time they didn't hide anything. My dad looked serious as he told me what had happened. About 20 minutes earlier, during the windstorm, he had stepped into the backyard to make sure nothing had blown over. While he was looking around, he noticed the light from my bedroom window shining across the yard. At first he thought it was reflecting off something. Then his eyes adjusted, and he realized it was a person. A man was standing directly outside my window, not moving, just staring inside my room. My dad shouted and ran toward him. The man immediately turned and sprinted toward the fence. According to my dad, he jumped over it effortlessly, like someone who had done it many times before. Within seconds he was gone. Hearing this made my stomach drop. Everything I had been afraid of for years suddenly became real. I hadn't imagined it. Someone really had been there. My parents called the police and then went to warn our neighbor who lived behind us. But when they knocked on her door, she didn't open it. Instead, she yelled from inside that if they didn't leave, she would call the police on them. That reaction felt incredibly strange. The police eventually searched the area, but they couldn't find the man. They suggested installing more cameras around the house. We did, but the mystery never went away. Even now, years later, I still wonder who that man was. Did he live nearby? Was he someone who had noticed a teenage girl's bedroom window with broken blinds? Or had he been watching me the entire time, waiting for something worse? Those questions still haunt me, because the most terrifying part isn't that someone stood outside my window. It's realizing he had probably been there for years, and no one knew. The night I heard someone whisper "Sheer" through the baby monitor, I realized there might be someone inside our house. I was 15 years old when my family moved into that place. Before that, we lived in a small apartment in a quiet suburban area of Alberta, Canada. But when my mom became pregnant with my little sister, it was clear we needed more space. After months of searching, my parents found a house just a few blocks away selling for an unusually low price. The house wasn't beautiful, the paint was fading, the yard looked neglected, and the neighborhood wasn't the best part of town. But it was affordable, and it had enough room for our growing family. My parents decided it was worth the risk. After moving in, my dad spent weeks fixing things around the house. The basement needed the most work. The floor was uneven, the walls were stained, and the bathroom barely worked. Slowly, he repaired everything. He installed new carpet, reinforced some wooden beams, fixed the plumbing, and even let me choose a patterned wallpaper for my basement bedroom. At first, everything felt great. The house was bigger than our old apartment, and I enjoyed having my own space downstairs. For the first couple of months, life felt completely normal. Then one evening, something strange happened. It was my dad's birthday, and we had gone out to dinner to celebrate. When we returned home later that night, we noticed something immediately. The front door was wide open. My mom froze. My dad told us to stay in the truck while he grabbed a heavy wrench from his toolbox and carefully went inside to check the house, even though he told us not to. My mom called the police anyway. Those 5 minutes waiting outside felt incredibly long. Eventually, my dad came back out and said he hadn't found anyone inside. When the police arrived, they searched the house as well. Nothing was missing, but something definitely felt wrong. Some of our belongings had been moved. Books had been knocked off my shelf in the basement, and a few items were in different places than we remembered. The officers eventually told us there was nothing else they could do. From that day forward, I started noticing strange sounds at night. My bedroom was in the basement, and sometimes I would hear soft knocking or scratching sounds coming from the walls or from somewhere underneath the floor. I always assumed it was the pipes. After all, the house was old, but one night something happened that I couldn't explain. It was around 2 in the morning. I was lying in bed playing my Nintendo DS under the blankets with the volume turned off so my parents wouldn't know I was still awake. That's when I heard it. Laughter. It was quiet but clear, and it was coming from the wall right next to my bed. My entire body froze. I held my breath and listened carefully. For a long time, nothing else happened. After about 30 minutes of silence, I slowly convinced myself that I must have imagined it. Eventually, I fell asleep. The strange noises continued occasionally over the next few weeks, but I tried to ignore them. Around that time, my baby sister was born. Since the basement was large enough, my mom decided to place her crib in my room at night so I could keep an eye on her. Of course, my parents still used baby monitors. They kept one receiver in the living room and another in the kitchen so they could hear if she cried. One night, my parents went out for a late dinner while I stayed home to watch the house. My sister was asleep in her crib downstairs, and I was upstairs in the living room watching a movie. After a while, I went to the kitchen to grab a snack. That's when I heard something from the baby monitor sitting on the counter. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps. My heart immediately started racing. I knew no one else was supposed to be in the house. Then my sister suddenly started crying. Through the speaker of the monitor, I heard a quiet voice, "Shoo." Right after that, there was a loud crashing sound. Without thinking, I ran straight to my parents' bedroom and grabbed my dad's rifle from the closet. The problem was the gun had a trigger lock on it and there was no ammunition nearby. But in that moment, I hoped whoever was downstairs wouldn't know that. I held the rifle tightly and covered the lock with my hand to make it look real. Then I slowly walked toward the basement door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the knob. When I opened the door and stepped down the stairs, my heart felt like it was going to explode. My sister's crib came into view. She was crying loudly, but there was no one else in the room. The baby monitor had been knocked onto the floor. Trying to sound brave, I shouted into the empty basement, "I'm armed. Come out before I find you." There was no response. I quickly grabbed my sister from the crib and ran upstairs. I slammed the basement door shut and pushed a chair under the handle so it couldn't open easily. Then I called my parents. They called the police and rushed home immediately. When the officers arrived, they made me sit in the back of their patrol car with my baby sister while they searched the house. Eventually, one of them came back outside. He said they hadn't found anyone. Everything appeared clear. But just as they were about to leave, my dad suddenly asked them something strange. "Did you check behind the bookshelf in the basement?" The officer looked confused, so my dad led him downstairs. When we followed them into my room, I immediately noticed something. My large bookshelf, the one built into the wall, was slightly open, like a door. Behind it was a small hidden space inside the wall where pipes ran through the house, and inside that narrow room, someone had been living there. On the floor were food wrappers, one of our missing cups, a bottle of lotion, a small switchblade knife, and an apple that had been partially eaten but still looked fresh. The police believed whoever had been hiding there escaped through the basement window while they were outside talking with us earlier. But that wasn't the worst part. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the bookshelf open again and looked carefully around the small hidden room. That's when I noticed something disturbing. There was a tiny hole drilled through the wall. When I looked through it, my stomach dropped. It pointed directly at my bed. From that hidden space, someone could watch everything I did: sleeping, getting dressed, playing games, doing homework, talking on the phone. Whoever had been hiding in our house had been watching me the entire time. I'm an adult now and live in my own apartment with my boyfriend, but my parents still live in that house. And even today, I sometimes wonder about the person who was hiding inside our walls because the police never found them, and sometimes I worry they might still know that house better than we ever did.